Do you think that, recently Prime Minister Kishida made kind of a world tour, visited Biden. He also visited, France, Italy, the UK, Canada. Do you think the analysis on his part is that, growing concerns about China as well as questions about the U.S. alliance?
Let's see. I think he's continuing a trend for Japan to develop more robust relations with a number of countries and to expand the contents of those relationships to include security matters. So I think that's a very healthy trend because it it causes Japan to be more engaged in the international security arena. Plus, it's also a way to gain support for Japan's security in general, plus its new initiatives. So I applaud those efforts of Japan to expand its security relations with other countries. It's very, very necessary, I think. I think the main purpose of his trip was uh, to get understanding of the recent security documents that were released, and to get the buy-in of those other countries that Japan's not pursuing a hostile militaristic path, but it's a natural progression of its role and responsibilities. And I also think it was to develop support for the agenda of the G7 meeting that's going to be held this summer in Hiroshima, where Kishida is originally from. And so he wants to make this G7 summit a huge success. So his going at this time will help them develop the agenda for those meetings. So I think it was a well-timed visit, and I think that it went off pretty well for him.
But so if he's meeting with the G7 countries ahead of time, he skipped Germany, though.
Yeah, there's been some commentary on that, and I'm not sure exactly of all the reasons behind that, but there has been commentary on that, and I'm not sure if it's in the context of Russia and Ukraine, or if there's another reason behind that.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Um, I guess since we kind of touched on this before, I'm just curious your thoughts. Do you think Japan should have nukes?
Um, for a long time, I was against that, and the reason being that Japan, haven't experienced, two atomic bombings, that that it had a unique voice in international affairs, that it should try to hold on to that special, uh, position, as long as possible. That and it's not an appropriate phrase to use, but it had a card internationally that it could use, a voice that it could speak out on nuclear issues in a way that probably no other country could. So I didn't want to see Japan surrender that. With that said, though, over the past 7, 8 years, I think a lot of things have changed. So back in 2015, when Trump was exploring running for president, if you remember, he made comments to the effect that that it would be fine if Japan were to develop nuclear weapons. Uh, Within Japan, among a number of politicians and commentators, there have been, and an increasing number of them, there have been comments along the lines that Japan should end its non-nuclear principles and allow for either nuclear weapon sharing or the U.S. to redeploy nuclear weapons back into Japan. So until 1960, we had nuclear weapons in mainland Japan. And then the revised security treaty necessitated something called the prior consultation clause, where if there were changes in equipment and armaments that we would notify the Japanese government, and hopefully they would give their blessing. But we could take nuclear weapons out of Japan in the 1950s, 1960, because we had free use in Okinawa. And so we basically were able to operate nuclear weapons from Okinawa. But so within Japan, there's been an argument for a number of years now that either nuclear sharing or allowing the U.S. to redeploy nuclear weapons into Japan. In 2017, I attended a conference, and a former Indian senior official attended, and he made the argument that in light of the proliferation of nuclear weapons, that it's irresponsible for a democracy and a country that honors and respects civilian control like Japan does, not to have nuclear weapons. So in other words, if there's going to be proliferation, it's better to have a responsible country have them rather than irresponsible countries to have them. So that was also another argument that kind of pushed me along the lines that, yeah, it would be interesting for Japan to entertain that. So personally, I think Japan should be to conduct the research necessary to do it, but without necessarily actually producing them right now. So it should go to as far as it can on the research and research side, and whether it shifts to development and production could come at a future point. But in between that and the situation we have right now could be nuclear sharing or U.S. redeploying nuclear weapons into Japan.
So you mentioned that you were at a meeting with a senior Indian official related to Japan affairs, and I guess this is a point I want to ask about India, because India and Japan are also kind of warming relations militarily, right? And what's going on there, and what does that have to do with China?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Japan and India have actually always had very, very close relations. And I think they were greatly solidified by the late Prime Minister Abe, both during his first term in 2006, 2007, as well as in over the past decade. Both being naval powers, both essentially bordering China. They make natural allies, in that regard. Shared values, democracy, rule of law. But as we know, India is essentially non-aligned power, and doesn't want to have alliance relations, with any country. You would think, based on its relations with China, that it would be a natural ally, but unfortunately, it's got its own views with regard to that. Japan's been able to facilitate, I think, India's activities with the U.S. and with Australia better than those two countries could do vis-a-vis India on its own. So I think for the Quad to have come together, it really needed Japan to be that facilitator. So the evolution of that relationship, we're seeing now with the Indian Air Force training with the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, as well as other interactions as well. So I think it's a natural progression. It'll probably take place or go as fast as India wants it to go. In the past, it would have been things can only move as fast as Japan wants it to go. But now Japan is, I think, fully on board with moving relationships forward as quickly as they can go. So in the Indo-Japanese realm, I think the relationship is going to, how fast it goes is going to be more India dependent than Japan dependent.
Is it a problem that India has mainly relied on Russian military technology and Japan has mainly relied on US technology?
If we're talking about a full-blown alliance relationship, yeah, I think that would be a significant problem. But I'm not sure just how far India is willing to go in integrating itself with with the other Quad members, or with AUKUS in the future, or whatever regional framework evolves in the future. I don't think it's a huge problem for Japan and the U.S. per se. I think it's a bigger problem for India in that sense. But India's got a very unique relationship with Russia. The Soviet Union, Russia, in the United Nations has essentially always voted in India's favor on issues, particularly vis-a-vis Pakistan. And so India is very indebted to Russia over those matters. The acquisition of Russian, weapons and equipment, and to a certain extent doctrine, very dependent on Russia. And then also Russian oil, it's very dependent. So India's in a very unique position, as you know. So.
Well, I guess as we start to wrap up today, I'm just curious, in a worst case scenario, what's at stake for Japan if China takes Senkaku, takes Okinawa, and takes Taiwan? How will that change the region?
I think, in order, Okinawa would be the last one. I think the more immediate threat now is Taiwan, the seizure of Taiwan. And if China were to take Taiwan, that to me changes the international politics for generations to come. I think it will push the United States out of Asia. It will weaken U.S. prestige in the region. It will force countries to recalculate and probably realign themselves with China, to include potentially Japan, the Philippines, obviously, other countries, Vietnam and other countries in the region. By the PLA getting redeployed to Taiwan, it will greatly disrupt Japan's trade and its ability to export and import. Almost everything goes by Taiwan. And so if it's in Chinese hands, Japan will have to essentially pay China for anything it does after that. And then that will have enormous impact within Japan, politically and economically, and it will make Japan subservient to China, I think. So the implications are huge for everybody. And then, if the scenario is that the Senkakus are taken simultaneously, that further weakens Japan. And then it makes a matter of time before Okinawa is taken. And then China will say, don't worry, we're stopping here. And then a couple years later, it'll ask for Kyushu and then other parts as well. So I just think it's immense. And that's why the need to protect Taiwan is enormous, because if Taiwan's lost, then everything's lost. But I may be in the minority, but I think that it'll be very, very difficult to protect Taiwan militarily. Therefore, within Japan, and today I gave a lecture before a defense group, I strongly call on Japan, the United States, and other nations to recognize Taiwan as a country, as it is.
Well, you can't use the C word.
I'm sorry. Yeah, exactly.
The C word.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous word to use.
Yeah. Well, in Japan, there are two phrases that are used: kuni or koka, and some people are hesitant to use it, but I use both of them, particularly koka, on a daily basis when talking about Taiwan. The reason for this is, as you know, 14 countries right now, 13 of which are in the United Nations, recognize Taiwan, but all of them are small, have basically no military power. However, if not 13 or 14, but 130, 140 countries were to recognize Taiwan, I believe China would have to reconsider any actions on Taiwan. To me, that's the only true deterrence that's possible at this point. And so I would like to see all the nations of the world, or as many as possible, to recognize Taiwan. Because without that, it's going to be a very, very tough fight, I think.